Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is a multi-time guest. Her name is Amy Volas, with a V, V-O-L-A-S, Amy Volas. Amy is the co-founder of Avenue Talent Partners, where she works with enterprise B2B tech founders to help them find their sales leaders. Typically, she's working with founders that are doing over $1 million in revenue up to about 25 million, because that's typically the time where a sales VP is necessary, a sales leader is necessary in order to help a startup continue to grow and eventually scale their sales. So she's been doing this for many, many years, and she's become a good friend over the last couple of years. In fact, just in April, she and I co-ran an event in Chicago you probably listened and heard about here on the show, where we helped a whole room full of founders. We had about 30 people in the room, many of them B2B tech founders and their teams, helping them to map out their roadmap to $100 million in annual recurring revenue. So she worked on the hiring front. I worked on the sales process front with everyone in the room. We had a great time. We thought it would be a good opportunity for us to get back together, talk a little bit about what we learned in that community that we built for those couple of days in Chicago. More importantly, the start of our conversation focuses on when it is the right time and when it is not the right time to be hiring sales leadership, meaning a VP of sales or a CRO especially, and even when it's not the right time to even hire an account executive or an AE. So this is a problem, and this is a challenge, an obstacle that Amy and I run into almost every single day as we talk to early stage B2B tech founders too often. And I understand the impatience that a founder might have when it comes to growing and scaling sales, where they feel like, I've got revenue, I got customers, I don't have any time. I need to go find sales help. I need to get a sales leader, a sales VP, a player coach of some kind. And oftentimes, 95% of the time, it's still too early. So a lot of our conversation focused on some specific examples that Amy gave from clients that she has, people that I've worked with in our coaching program, to help you understand why you have to wait until it is very, very painful to hire a head of sales or even hire an account executive. This is a topic I keep running into over and over and over. I told Amy as we were prepping, it's almost like I feel like I'm explaining to people like, no. See, the earth goes around the sun, because it's like scientific fact that you need to wait to hire a head of sales, a VP of sales of any kind. And until you have a repeatable repeatable sales process, you can't start to scale those sales with sales leadership and a sales team. So it's a big topic that keeps coming up over the years and years and years that she and I have been doing our work with the startup community. And so we wanted to take some more time to talk about why you need to wait, even if it's painful. So that's the main topic today, talking about that, plus some of our learnings and why it's important for founders just like you to reach out, to ask for help, to find community, and why it's important to give just as much as you get, or even give more than you get, because the more you give, the more you get. So that's it for now. Let's head over to my conversation with Amy Volas. Amy Volas, it's been like a whole month since we've talked. I can't believe it.
Oh, Scott Sambucci, you missed me, so you had to bring me right back in.
You're a hard person to escape, Amy. I see you everywhere on LinkedIn, and I get your emails. And even if we're not talking, I feel like we're always connected in some way. So I appreciate that about you. So I think I can't remember if it was your third or maybe even fourth time now on the show. So you are a multi-time guest, which is awesome. You're in the Sales Qualia Podcast Hall of Fame for sure. And so just to kind of frame up for the people listening, the reason it's been a month since we've talked, but there was a period of about 4 months where we were talking like multiple times per week, sometimes multiple times per day, because we had just a month ago in April in Chicago ran our live event, which is your sales roadmap to $100 million in ARR. And so the reason we wanted to get back together is just kind of talk about learnings and what we saw and what we observed with the founders that joined us and their teams, and not just what they learned, but what you and I learned individually. So definitely want to talk about those things. But as a way to get people, a little bit of quick value, I really, really, really want to talk about a topic that it's one of these topics that's been around forever, but for whatever reason, in the last couple of months, it's really been irking me. And I don't know if it's because I keep seeing it more often than I've seen it in the last couple of years. And the thing that's been irking me is how many founders I talk to that are 10 customers, a couple $100,000 in revenue, if they're lucky enough to raise a small seed round, the first thing they're thinking is like, I got to hire a head of sales. I got to hire a player coach. I got to hire a VP of sales. How do I do that? And I know this is a world you live in every single day. So I just want to, I don't know how many times we have to talk about this, but I definitely want to hear from you. What are you observing? What are you seeing? What are you telling founders? Like, why is this something founders are not getting?
Oh my gosh. I think so many thoughts, but the first one that comes to mind is I had a conversation with a founder yesterday, and I talked to her like 2.5 years ago. And I said to her, you're way too early to be doing any hiring. I remember because I went through my notes of the last time that we talked, and she only had like 150,000 in ARR, and she wanted to hire like 3 or 4 salespeople and maybe a sales leader. And I remember the conversation beyond my notes of saying to her, you really have no business hiring anybody right now, that this is still a responsibility for you. And you and I've talked about this a lot. 2 things. One, you can't scale what you don't have. And the thing about sales, and it's very seductive, and I get it, when you are a founder, especially for my technical folk out there, this is foreign. It would be like if you sat me down and asked me to code something, I would get sweaty palms. I wouldn't want to do it. I'd want to find somebody to do it for me. And I think that is true for sales. But the problem is that while that might be an opportunity or an option, it certainly is an option, it's one that comes with a lot of cost when it doesn't work out. And more times than not, and I don't have specific percentages, but more times than not, I find that it doesn't. And so to quantify that statement a little bit, I do strategic advisory with early stage founders. I'm part of Stage 2 Capital's Catalyst as an LP and talk to early stage founders. I also have my executive search firm, Avenue Talent Partners, and all we deal with is folks that are qualified as early stage founders. And we have the ATB studio, early stage founders, and then all the people that I meet on LinkedIn in the different places. And so this statement comes from all of that. And the biggest driver of demand for me, regardless of any of the things that I do, is I've made a mistake and I'm feeling a lot of pain, and how do I clean it up? And a lot of that has to do with I hired too early and I hired the wrong people. And so this founder that I talked to yesterday, she had emailed me and she had said, I remember our conversation. You'd be very proud of me. I've crossed over the $1 million threshold of ARR, and it's been myself and my co-founder selling this. And I think it might be time to hire, but you've been in the back of my mind. Well, first of all, that delighted me that I actually was in the back of her mind at this time. And for the past 2+ years, she and her co-founder have been building. They have just shy of 45-ish customers. She knew her metrics like the back of her hand. And we were talking yesterday, and she said, I wanted to come back to you. But what she said was, I want to hire now these 3 to 4 AEs. And I said, why? And we were digging into this. But she also said, and I think I might hire a sales leader. And I said, let's talk about this. Why? And it was this classic case of somebody was introduced to her. It's a gentleman that hasn't been in a startup before. He's a director of sales now. He wants to be a VP. He's willing to be a player to start, and then to be a player coach, and then to be a full-time VP within a year. And he wants at least 400 to 450 OTE. And I said, you need to back away like a little baby lobster. Like you need to back that. And so I think this is what happens. You get introduced to somebody by a trusted source, and it sounds really great. And oh my gosh, I could get this off my plate. And if I'm hiring these 3 to 4 people, and I've got that $1 million in ARR, and I've got these 40-ish customers, and I've done the things, I should be able to hire somebody. And the answer is maybe, maybe not. But I think if you're not even near there, and sales just feels like this foreign object, it is your job as a founder, as a founding team, to validate your market, because sales cannot fix what's broken. Sales cannot fix what you don't have, and sales cannot scale what you have not validated, proven, and repeated. And so that is a long, drawn out, a little bit of a story at the same time, reason why you and I are speaking the same language. What am I seeing in the market? I'm seeing a lot of the same things where people, I think the patience level has reached a fever pitch of not necessarily being there. And if we are no longer growth at any cost, and I just can't get, the funding or whatever I need to get, how else can I get there fast? And the thing is, there is no thing that happens overnight that's sustainable from my experience of almost 30 years.
No, that's a really good, important story to share, because the one thing that I heard inside of all that story was someone who was at 150K in ARR 2.5 years ago, and they just hit $1 million in revenue with the founder and co-founder. And so for most of the things that we compare the growth to, somebody from the outside looking in was like, oh my God, what took you so long? Because it's supposed to be quick, get to the first million and then start to scale. And that's exactly the reason why, as a founder, you have to do that selling, because there was, you and I were not there for those 2.5 years, but I can imagine I know from my experience coaching startups and coaching founders in that window between the $100 and $1 million range, there's so many different pivots that you're doing on the sales front. Like, what different markets might you be targeting? Who are the people you need to sell to? What's your pricing structure look like? What are your implementations look like on the back end? And you could be 4 or 5 customers in and realize oh, wait a minute, we actually can't sell to those banks because they need an implementation we can't do. And you're like, okay, now what do we do? Now we got to figure a way to support these banks that we actually did sell to. And now we got to start over and sell to a whole different segment of banks that maybe we can integrate with or implement with. So there's so many of these iterations, these cycles of learning that happen. And because you're talking enterprise, at best, you're talking 3-month sales cycles. Usually it's going to be 6 to 12 months. So you've got this long sales cycle and long iteration cycle and learning cycle that 2.5 years actually goes by really fast.
Well, and Insight Venture Partners has a wonderful set of data that I reference all the time. It's called their SaaS periodic table. And basically It goes through, are you at startup or scale up? And startup is really by and large what we're talking about. It's that earlier stage stuff. And they break it down. What I really like about the data is they break it down by SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and how long it takes for an AE to ramp, let alone all these other metrics wrapped around going to market. But that's one that I have talked about a lot through the years. And, just so for companies that are trying to go after enterprise, for example, and let's take the example that was given to me 2.5 years ago, and I want to hire 3 or 4, and I am nowhere near $200,000 in ARR yet, and I'm in the enterprise. Well, compensation for a true enterprise seller, let's be real, let's break this down here. Base salary on the very low end, it's like 130, and it can go up to 200 plus, depending on the complexity of the deal. It's usually
just for the base.
Just for the base. It's usually a 50-50 split between base and variable. There's usually a guaranteed amount of money on top of that you're paying them as they ramp. And for enterprise sellers, they're usually asking for at least 4 to 6 months. And that's absolutely appropriate. Oh, and by the way, you're probably giving them some equity too if you're early. So multiply that out by 3 or 4 people. And then here's where Insights data comes into play. It takes their data. It takes 12 plus months for the person to be fully ramped. And what ramp means is they have a repeatable, measurable pipeline. They may not have even closed a deal yet in enterprise, but they've got a chock full of pipeline where they've got things for the short term, the near term, and the long term. So now if I've got 3 to 4 reps and it's going to take me 12 plus months and I don't even have 200K in ARR, you're going to run out of money. And so you can't short circuit that expectation of how enterprise buyers buy and the complexity and what's required and the customizations and the integrations and all the things that are wrapped, security reviews, procurement, all this stuff that happens. So then if you backtrack that up and you say, but no, they should be fully ramped in 3 months, get out of here. Even Insights data at the SMB, like high velocity transactional selling, it's at least 3 to 6 months to fully ramp. So just thinking about it from the bigger picture of when do I actually need to recoup my return on my investment for the hires that I'm making? And is that congruent and synonymous with what the marketplace is? And I find that a lot of the time, Scott, those two things are not together. And in fact, they're very far apart. And that's where the setbacks, the costs, the harm happens to a business and to the person's career that, heard what they wanted to hear and got excited about your vision, but your vision isn't rooted necessarily in reality. Now, when those two things come together, and they are, chef's kiss.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time in those early days, it's not there.
Yeah. I mean, I know, speaking from personal experience, I came out to Silicon Valley in 2002, late 2001, early 2002. And I was working at ed tech startup, and I was sort of head of business development or director of business development, which meant go figure out how we're going to build the business. And we had a really narrow target. We were selling specifically to universities and professors that teach economics classes, because our founder was an economist at Stanford, and that's what he did. Like, we were super niche from the beginning. Like, that's all the product could do and support. And it still took us a full year before we could get from like showing beta versions of the software and doing like pilots and tests to the place where like, oh, now we have an actual rhythm. We know who to talk to. We know how to do the demos. We know how to overcome the technical objections, because we have to talk to IT people to let them open up a firewall so the students can access it inside the lab. Like, all of those things took us a full year to get there. Now, the second year was great because we went quickly up to 2 million in revenue. So within 24 months, we went from 0 to 2 million. But that first year was like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, couple 100,000 in like pilots and things. But then it was that second year that things started to really hit stride. Now, I had the same experience when I was at Blend, where I came in as head of sales, even though we didn't have any sales at all. So they hired actually very soon. You would have probably said, you guys are not ready to sell. It was a situation, somewhat of an anomalous situation, because I knew the founders from their past life at Palantir. They knew me, and they knew that I could do a lot more work than just sell stuff. It was a lot of customer discovery, even some product development, those kinds of things. So I came in as a consultant in Q4 of 2013. We got our first couple paying customers late that year. Then we got our first big implementation in the early part of 2014. And that wasn't even our ideal customer. It was just a way for us to get our product in the hands of customers using it every day. It wasn't until January 2015, and I remember the specific meeting that we had with a mortgage lender, the top 5 mortgage lender, in like the 40th floor of a high rise in New York City. And I remember that meeting, I'm like, this is how we sell our stuff. It was like 15 months after I started. And then later that year, we knocked down like 4 big banks, and they were, I think, the first 4 other big customers. But that took us, and those are founders like Nima, the founder and still the CEO of the company. He would get on airplanes with me. He would go to meetings with me. He would go to Dallas and Des Moines, Iowa, and Washington, D.C. and New York. The product manager would come with us. The VP of engineering would come with us. I mean, it was all hands on deck selling. And even with all of that support, it took us 13 months, 15 months to figure out like, oh, this is how we sell our stuff. It takes time.
You can't bake a full-on cake in an easy bake oven. You can bake a little baby piece of it, but you can't bake a full-on cake. Even a cake in an air fryer takes more than 5 minutes.
You could bake a cake in an air fryer.
Oh, you can. Yes, you can.
All right, folks, we are off and running. And as you can tell, Amy and I are pretty passionate about this topic that we're talking about, and why it's important for a founder to wait to hire that head of sales, that VP of sales, or even an account executive at their tech startup. So you're going to learn a lot more from us throughout the course of this episode on that topic. And so, if you are a founder and you're thinking about like, what do I need to do to be at a place where I am ready to hire an account executive or an SDR team, or be at a place where we have a repeatable sales process so I can hire a VP of sales, then chances are I could probably help you out with that. If you're a B2B tech founder, if you're selling to the enterprise, this is all that we do every single day here at Sales Quality, is we coach early stage B2B tech founders to help them build that repeatable sales process you're looking for. Meaning, how do you predictably get leads in the top of your funnel? How do you think about your lead qualification and your target market? How do you do the proper amount of customer discovery so you can focus your selling around the problem that your prospects have, not the product that you've built? How to think about pricing, how to think about onboarding and support, how to start thinking about building out that early part of your sales team so that you can start to scale and be in a place where you can hire sales leadership down the road. So if you want to get some more help, or you just want to have a quick chat about your situation, where we can jam on a couple of ideas, some places where we can identify some gaps or opportunities that you have to improve on what you're doing right now over the next 6 to 12 months, then let's hop on a call. I offer these calls pro bono because I want to help as many founders as I can. So easiest way to do to get yourself on my calendar, shoot over an email to Scott, SCOTT, at salesqualia, salesqualia.com. Grab your phone right now, shoot me a text, or shoot me an email, scott@salesqualia.com. Type the word private into the subject line, lets me know you want to have a private chat. My assistant will help us get some time on the calendar, and we'll have a quick chat to work on a few ideas for your startup. All right, that's it for now. Let's head back to my conversation with Amy Volas.
But, one of the things that I think about, there's two things that I was thinking about as you were talking, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. But think about then if your startup is a true category creator. And then I think about a book that I read many years ago. I highly recommend it. It's Crossing the Chasm.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
You've got your early adopters and you've got your laggards and you've got, the in between, and then when the chasm is crossed. But what's interesting about it is when you are truly doing something that has never been done before, and there's opportunity in the market, it's going to take you longer to get folks on the bus, even if they're early adopters. So you've got that, but then a lot of the work that I do from the search side, and even in my own career, I remember reminding myself, and luckily I'm married to, as you know, a very pragmatic man that is a CPA, that would remind me that, if you make a move, if you change something, the first year is never going to be your best. It's the build year.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even if founders are listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, but I met this person, they've got a Rolodex.
Yeah.
They're going to open up all these doors. I still, to this day, from 20 years ago, have buyers that were once my customers that call me to this day and were lovely, lovely people to each other. Those relationships are firmly planted. And sure, I can have dinner, we can have conversations, I can ask for a meeting, I could probably call in a favor if I needed to. But that doesn't mean what I do today is synonymous with what they need now. And even if it is, especially in enterprise sales, buying cycles, if I've signed a multi-year deal with your biggest competitor, or I don't see the need immediately, my timing is not your timing. And so in true enterprise sales, in any sort of sales role, you're never going to get maximum production or results in that first year. And it's why my heart breaks so much about the stats that we see in terms of turnover in tech. For an individual contributor, it's 16 months and shrinking. And for a leader, it's 18 to 24 months. If you're an enterprise, that party's just being thought about to get started, let alone anything else. And then think about the friction of what that does to your buyer journey, what that does to the team, the cost that's associated to that. These are all things that I don't think people necessarily think about. And you're well-intended and you meet somebody and it's like, whoa, they're going to open these doors and this is an opportunistic hire. But the chances of that person with a Rolodex truly delivering what they are thinking that they can, that perception is not going to be your reality. I go to Vegas and bet on that. And then on the flip side of that, when that Rolodex shrivels up like a raisin, so it looks like a plump, juicy grape right now, it shrivels up like a raisin. And now I've got to go back and find more grapes to harvest. And I have to do that hard work. Most people that are touting their Rolodex don't necessarily want to do that work. And then your work that you require to do this thing is not aligned with what they want to do. And now you have unnecessary cost and friction.
Yeah. Yeah. That's when the AE goes back and says, oh, like, man, if we just had better marketing.
No.
Like, I need an SDR that's going to help me get them some leads. It's like, no, you have to do that work. And even more to the point, it's that you as the founder need to show that person, this is how we get leads, right? This is how we have a system that is repeatable on the top of the funnel. This is how we qualify the leads. These are all the buyers that are involved. These are the questions that we ask. Because yeah, you can hire that superstar AE, but you still got to teach that person your system. whether it's like a dancer or a sports person or anybody else you're trying to, like, somebody could be a great dancer at a show on Broadway, but then you take them in and you say, hey, we want you to be part of the Super Bowl halftime. Like, that person's dance routine on Broadway, they can't do that dance routine on Broadway in the middle of the Super Bowl. Well, why not? Because the Super Bowl's got its own choreographed show. Like, it's its own thing. You hire that talent that is shown that they can dance at the highest level, but then you need to make sure that you're teaching them and training them to matriculate into your system.
And you could be a hip hop dancer and I could be a prima ballerina, and that dance is not the same.
Yeah.
And it, I'm going to be great at it. And so that also proves the point that there are 50 shades of gray when it comes to sales. And just because we can both dance doesn't mean that we're doing the same dance. And what you need for your business might be a completely different dance. Maybe it's modern dance where you're doing hip hop, I'm doing ballet, and you need something else. Or maybe this person over here needs the waltz. Very different thing. And the steps might be a little the same, but I may not even want to listen to that music or do that dance at all. And so I think it's that intentionality that we spent a lot of time talking about when we were together in Chicago with the founders that were in the room. It's that intentionality of just stopping and thinking about not just the here and now, but later. And what's interesting about process and this ramp and this thing that we're talking about, back to the story of yesterday and the founder that I talked to, I said to her, if you hire, and we agreed that she should not be hiring a leader yet. It didn't make sense for her. And so I gave her a few other things that she could do. And I said, but you have to think, how are you going to onboard? How are you going to support? How are you going to train? And she said, oh, my co-founder and I, we have all these Notion docs, and I'll read what he's saying or he'll read what I'm saying, and then we'll talk from there. And I said, you do realize that's not onboarding. A Notion doc and making somebody read that, everybody learns differently. And she stopped and she was like, I didn't even Roy is screaming, my cat in the background. He has something to say about this. But, she was like, I didn't even think about that. And I said to her, what have you documented in the journey for the last 2+ years since we talked about what it takes to get these 40 customers? Oh, and by the way, what's your churn? She's like, we haven't lost any customers. Awesome. What are you doing to keep them? Do you have that documented somewhere? Do you have a CRM system? If you don't, how are you going to determine where they spend your time versus where you've spent your time so it's not messy? And she was like, I haven't even thought about that.
Right. Yeah.
If that's messy, guess what that does? If you don't have that, if you're not thinking about that, if you're just relying on a Notion doc or none of that exists, it's not that you can't get through it. But what I want you to do, if you're listening to this, is to understand that it'll take you longer. So if you're looking for the easy bake oven or the air fryer, that's nowhere in your purview, because that friction of, well, everything's in my head and I want you to be a mind reader, but you're not. And I don't speak the same language as you as sales. You're going to have friction. It's going to take longer to find your mojo together. And that's going to set you back longer. Do you have budget? Do you have patience? Is your market ready for that time? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but you've got to factor that into expectations.
Yeah, I'm glad that she's open-minded to it. I've had two, and I do want to dovetail into what we learned in Chicago in a moment. I've had two conversations with two different founders the last 2 days. So yesterday morning, two founders at 400K ARR, just about to close a seed round. And they're like, well, we're just looking to hire another salesperson. I was like, tell me more about that. We're like, well, we have this halftime salesperson. We have a marketing person who's doing some sales for us. And that's how we've gotten the revenue so far. So we felt like if we had a full-time salesperson, we could grow twice as fast. I said, it's interesting. So how much time are you spending on sales? And it got really quiet. And they said, well, not very much right now. I was like, okay, well, tell me more about that. Well, I'm more of the CTO. I'm the tech person. I'm working on the product side. And the founder, the other co-founder was like, well, I mean, I've been doing other stuff, raising capital and, going out to conferences and traveling and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, how did you get some of those other customers? Didn't you sell some of them? And they said, well, yeah, like we sold the first couple and then we got this halftime salesperson, marketing person, blah, blah, blah. I said, how was it when you sold it? And they said, it was actually really, really easy. I said, how was it when they sell it? And they said, well, it takes a lot longer. I was like, so imagine if you would have just spent the last 12 months selling it yourself, instead of relying on this halftime salesperson and this marketing person to do a job that she doesn't know how to do. And if instead you just would have sold it yourself, where do you think you would be revenue wise? And he said, oh, that's a really good point. And I said, so I don't think you need to hire another salesperson. Just go keep selling faster because you're the founder. Figure this out. Then you can go hire a salesperson when you get to $1 million. So again, at least they were open to it. Right. Now, on the other hand, I talked to another founder today, and he's at I think he's at 3.6 million in ARR. He said, we have a really clear path to close to 10 this year. He works like 7-figure deals. And he said, I think I want to hire a VP of sales or a CRO. I said, CRO, that's a big hire for somebody at your stage. I think it's maybe a little too far. Maybe you're thinking VP of sales. And he said, yeah, I'm thinking VP of sales. I said, what do you need the VP of sales to do? Well, I need somebody to come in and help me close some deals. I'm just like out of bandwidth. And he was telling me more about like what he needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, sounds to me like you actually need an AE, not a VP of sales. And I explained to him all the things that you talk about, Amy. You can't have a player coach. You can't have somebody kind of managing people and kind of closing deals. It's one or the other. And I said, imagine if you yourself were able to get to 10 million in revenue. Then you hire a VP of sales. Because even if you were to hire somebody today that you think could be a VP of sales, by the time you get to $10 million in revenue, the person who you thought could be your VP of sales is probably not qualified to be a VP of sales of a $10 million company instead of a $3 million company. And he's like, oh, crap. I didn't even think about that. So, and he's done this before. He started a company in his 20s and he raised multiple rounds and sold the company for 9 figures. So over 100 million. So he's done this before, but even he needed that reminder. And he's like, okay, you're right. I'm just going to buckle down. I'm going to do the sales. He's probably going to get some more help from me and some other people to help him guide him through that. But at the end of the day, like he doesn't need a VP of sales and he's at 3.6 million closing in on 10. So it just was really revealing to me that those people are out there. We just need to, like, those founders need to remind themselves, like, this is the true path to get there.
The numbers
fail.
Exactly. And the numbers only tell one part of the story, right? So his 3 mil on the path to 10 comes from really meaty, large deals. So I would venture to guess that he has a handful of clients and he just needs somebody to help, ease the load of getting new business in. Most would say that 3 million number that equals a VP of sales. It's certainly not a CRO. Let me remind everybody for those that are listening, a CRO, a real CRO, is an executive strategic leader of a lot of other strategic leaders and teams of people. And you hire them when that is chaotic and you need to wrangle all of that together.
So what would be examples of the strategic teams that a chief revenue officer would be managing? Just for people, because I think that's a topic or a title that people really don't know what it means. They just, because even this guy I talked to, he's like, yeah, okay, I said CRO, but I actually meant VP of sales. I think it gets confused.
Well, it gets confused, and if they're talking to somebody and that person that they're talking to is prioritizing, their personal brand or what their trajectory looks like, it's like, well, I'm a VP of sales. For me to even consider this job, I need to have a CRO, and they've never been one before. This is what a CRO, the teams that you asked about, it's going to be pre-sales, it's going to be post-sales, it's going to be sales, it's going to be the levels of sales. Most of these teams have sales engineers, they have partnerships or biz dev or channel, they have inside, they have outside, they have outbound, they have inbound, they have field, they have all the different segments, perhaps of SMB, mid-market, enterprise. Then you've got the pieces around it where what's the SDR team? If there is an SDR team, is it, in addition to that, account management plus customer success? That's part of it. In a lot of cases, it's also marketing. It could be growth. There are lots of different things, but that person typically owns all of that. And in each one of those things, they have a VP or an SVP that then has a VP that then has an RVP that then has, and I think what's important here is in my entire career, there has been one person. I just talked to him last week and it was delightful. His name is Nolan Ferris. Nolan and I go back to our Yahoo days together. When I met Nolan was a senior director. Nolan recruited me to come over to Indeed to build out an enterprise function together. When I met Nolan at Indeed, it was sub 10 million. He went from sub 10 million to $1.5 billion exit. After that exit is when he became CRO. He was with the company for 14 years.
Wow.
And he just recently left to become COO for another company. 14 years. I mean, that's not when he became CRO, but
that's the timeline.
But I've only seen it one time. So when I talk to a founder and they're like, I need to hire something that's going to get me to 100 million and they're at 5, no, that's going to be potentially, and in most cases, different people along the way, because what we've done in the last 10, 15 years is we've created a lot of one-trick ponies where a lot of the sales leaders that came up through the ranks, they learned how to do one thing really well. But when it comes to a CRO, you're talking about the strategic whole pie, not just a piece of it. And if you haven't seen that before, there's a real big problem there. And then you've got the blind leading the blind.
Yeah. So I'm glad you shared that story because it should give people some context. That CRO is a big job, right? And it's for like many millions in revenue. Could be 30 million at the starting point, but probably closer to 100 million. Because until then, you're going to have VPs and senior leadership that can handle each of those segments. You have your VP of sales that's handling the SDR and the AE and account management team. You have a head of customer success handling that part of the function. You've got a head of marketing, a VP of marketing that's handling that. And as long as they're working pretty closely together and coordinating pretty well, that should be good enough to get you to 30 million plus. And then at that point is where you said you might be going to different market segments, enterprise, mid-market, SMB. You might be thinking about international. You might be thinking about other partnership channels, like you said. And that's where it gets really complex. Like the spaghetti soup gets pretty thick. And that's where, okay, now I need somebody who can step in and organize all these functions.
And mind you, a real CRO, they're heavily focused on the strategy. They are not the ones that are nails dirty on the front lines doing the rep coaching and all of those things, right?
They have a sales enablement team that's designed to do that. And a sales operation team that tracks all of the dashboards and the systems and the metrics.
So hopefully for anybody listening that's seduced by the CRO, and if you're like, oh, but I need them to build out all the dashboards and I need them to hire every rep and then manage them and coach them and mentor them and do their forecasting and do their pipeline reviews and have daily stand-ups, that's not going to be your CRO.
Yeah. Well,
let's talk that forever.
Yeah. So, I know we got a few minutes left, and I do want to dovetail into something you alluded to, and I talked about at the top of the show, which is the event that we ran in Chicago a month ago. And I think this, like the segue here, I think for this conversation is, okay, if I'm a founder and I'm in this situation, it's like, how do I get help? How do I ask for help? Where can I go to get some of the answers to these questions? And that's the reason that we ran this event that we ran in Chicago, is to give founders and CEOs of these enterprise tech startups like a place to go and share ideas. And so, I know you ran Thursday Night Sales, co-hosted Thursday Night Sales for many years. So you know yourself the power of community. I'd just love to get maybe your perspectives. I feel like you've got a certain expertise around what it means to be part of a community, how to reach out and ask for help in these communities, or even reach out and ask for help from people like you or me. What have you seen? What's the difference between somebody who's willing to partake in that community or willing to take that step out or raise their hand versus the ones that aren't? Who are the kinds of people that have been successful in the communities that you run?
So I have Thursday Night Sales, and then I also independently have Better Together. And it's interesting because the thing about community, and I'm not talking about how it's evolved, where many communities are just places to monetize. The true spirit of the word community, in my opinion, is when you have a safe place where a collection of people that are going through some of the same things, thinking about some of the same things, wanting to learn about some of the same things, come together without judgment to be able to break these things down to genuinely get better together. That's why I named the group Better Together. And I've seen through the years people that do drive-bys, right? Like they come and they're like, oh, this isn't for me, and they peace out, and that's okay. Or they come and you see them every single week, or they come and they go and they come back again. And it's the come back again, or the people that are there every week, that the common thread there is their ego is in the back seat. It's not in the front seat. And they know that they don't have all the answers. And they know that they need help. And, the problem about help is there's no shame and getting help. The problem is when you don't get it and you need it and you think you can solve all of it on your own. But I think the true meaning of the word community is when you can come together, there is that aligned vision of this is what we're here to do and you know what it's about. Like, I'm not going to join a community for ultra marathoners. That has nothing to do with me, but you would do that, right? And if I went in there, I think I would stick out like a sore thumb, and maybe people wouldn't be judging me, but they'd be like, what do you have to, I couldn't tell you how to train for that or how it feels the day after. And maybe this is what you eat while you're along the way that helps you, and the gear that you need to have, and all that stuff. But I think that's the thing about help. And we talked about this when we were in Chicago together, is you have to have a filtration system, because in the world that we live in this digital age, and with ChatGPT and AI and all these things, getting data, just because there's data out there, bad data in equals bad data out. So you have to have a filtration system of, in my mind's eye, I mute out as much of the noise as I can. I don't care how big the voice is. I don't care how big the personal brand is. I don't care how big the following is. What I care about is, for the things that I'm going through, is this a person that has experienced it and gone through it successfully to get where I want to go, or they're experiencing it with me? And that's when community is really powerful, is when you have that combination, so that if somebody's facilitating a discussion, they've been there, they've done that, they can speak the language fluently, and they can help guide you appropriately. So that's all the stuff that we can see, all the voices, all the articles, the podcasts, the things, content. Then there's context, right? What's the context of the big hook of a first line of a book you read, or a post that you pay attention to, or tweet? Okay, well, that hook got me sucked in, but what's the context of that hook? And then there's the competency to back the three up. And that's the stuff that I think is really important and that I'm proud of, is I don't talk about things that I don't know. And if I'm going to bring and ask people to kind of trust fall with me, I get a really big charge out of learning how other people think and trying to meet them where they are. And if I don't have the answer, I'll say it and I'll try to point them in a better direction. But there's this symbiotic relationship of a flywheel that creates, where it's like, wow, now I'm watching somebody learn something that was shared, and they've applied it and they've learned it, they mastered it, and now they're coming back and sharing it. And that new share, there's a little iteration that I can do because it gave me a different point of view. Awesome. That's where it's really powerful. For founders, it's a lonely, thankless, high pressure job, really, truly. And it is incredibly difficult. Why make it harder to try to absorb everything on your own and think that you don't need help? You just have to get it in the right place.
I mean, the loneliness piece is real. Like this founder I was talking to today, he's like, man, I've had 25 meetings between yesterday and today. And he said, I spent 13 hours at my desk yesterday on meetings, between investor stuff, sales meetings, internal meetings. And he's just like back to back to back. So yeah, you're like interacting with people all day, but he's alone as the founder. He doesn't have somebody else working with him, somebody else he can talk to. In the Chicago event, the thing that I really appreciated is like the way we structured it was like day one, I was teaching frameworks around sales. You were teaching frameworks around hiring. It was like you and I were kind of the professors in the room. But day two is where we turned it into more of an interactive session, where we had a mastermind table set up. We had these small groups where people could pick and choose different topics that they wanted to learn about. And what's really interesting, because we do this with our coaching calls in our program, they're in small groups. And the reason is because every time somebody asks a question, the first answer for me or any of our coaches is, well, it depends. Like, what should my open rates be? Well, it depends. Give me more context for what you're trying to do. Or like, how do I run my product demo? Well, here's a good framework, but tell me more about your situation. And then as you get more context from the founders, then inevitably other people in that group or other people in that mastermind feel like, oh, okay, now, even though you're in health tech and I'm in ed tech, I can see some parallels. Here's what we did in a situation that's kind of like yours. And now all of a sudden, those two founders are coaching each other, and we're just like sitting back and watching them, teach each other. So it's this notion that none of us is smarter than all of us. And so, the more we get people working together, the better it's going to be. Now, for founders, sometimes it's hard. You're like, well, I'm going to like show up and spend an hour on this call and I'm going to get, maybe 10, 15 minutes to work on my problem. Like, what do I do for the other 45 minutes? I'm like, well, that's the point of community. It's almost like 3 gives for 1 get. If you give to 3 other people and you get back 1 unit for you, that's a win for everyone. And chances are the other 3 people that are asking questions are probably going to ask questions that you either had yourself or you didn't realize you had and you should be asking. And you're like, oh, wow. Okay. That's a good, I was thinking about hiring an SDR. I'm glad you brought that question up because now I realize I don't need to hire one either because I need to do it myself. So I like that rule of 3 gives and a get, and then giving that context because there is no right or wrong on a lot of these answers to these sales questions or hiring questions or organizational questions. It's just like it depends. It's the context. So you can read the blogs and go to the webinars and do all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the people in the room will help you solve the problem specifically for you because you can give them and they can give you a lot more context.
Which proves the theory of there's 50 shades of gray, right? And so it literally is so contextual based. And what's interesting that I get really tuned into, and it totally turns me on at the same time where I'm like, wow, this is great. You have a captive audience with me, is when I see people talking shop and riffing off of each other. And there's something new that I get that I'm thinking about. And that's the whole spirit of mentorship, right? We used to say at Thursday Night Sales, this is mentorship at scale. But then I thought about the true meaning of mentorship. And there's a woman that I have been mentoring for over 5 years. Her name is Alexi Mudawar. And
oh yeah, she's fantastic.
She's absolutely phenomenal. And she has become a formidable businesswoman and she's wicked sharp. And I'm learning from her. And so what's really cool is when you have those relationships and you're in a safe place to be able to share, to be like, hey, this is what I took from what you did. And I actually applied it over here. I'm like, wait, I never thought of applying it over there. That's a totally different use case. I love, and I get nerded out by use case stuff. Like, oh, I'm thinking about it here, but it actually can go over here and over here and over here. How did you do that actually? Now the student is becoming the teacher, so to speak. And you've got this incredible support system, first and foremost, in a safe place, no judgment. So you have to set the rules up. But then you also have this shared learning where everyone is leveling up at the same time. And that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I just encourage people to reach out. I mean, I've worked with business coaches throughout my years, worked with, different sports coaches with my ultra marathoning and before that with triathlon stuff. Right now I've been working on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for almost 2 years. And I think about the way that he runs the class. It's like Michael will obviously teach. In most cases, he'll do the teaching. Okay, today we're going to work on this particular, we're going to pass guard, right? And he'll show the stuff. But then he has us pair up with other classmates that are about the same level because he wants you to work with somebody who's just like you so you can see what mistakes they might make and you can correct them and they can see mistakes you're making that you don't even see. And then the two of you are kind of figuring it out. And then in that group session afterwards at the end is then you end up, we call it rolling, where you're wrestling with other people of all levels. So as a white belt, you could be rolling with a black belt or a purple belt or a brown belt. And of course, you're going to get smoked. But the point is now it's an opportunity for that upper belt to teach a lower belt to reinforce things or to try new stuff that they couldn't try on somebody at their level. And obviously for the lower belt to see what it's like to have somebody at a much higher level. So the actual amount of teaching Michael does, it's like probably 15% of the class. Everything else is everyone teaching each other. And so I was fortunate enough on Thursday last week, I was awarded my blue belt, which is your first belt after white belt. Yes. And as much as I thanked my instructor, Michael, my first instinct was to go around to every other person and say, thank you for helping me. Whether it was another white belt that was a good partner for me, or the guys that were brown belts or blue belts or black belts that would take the time to teach me stuff. They're like, dude, stop making this mistake. It's really annoying. And they would take the time to do it. So I felt like I owed a thank you to everyone because everyone helped me. If I was only doing one-on-one lessons with Michael, there's no way I would have been able to learn as quickly as I did. So
and what a special gift, right? Like what a special gift that is, where that truly is what I mean by the sum of our parts. And that's why it's very, very important to choose wisely who you surround yourself with, because there is so much. And just because there's the thing that other founders do, or, you may have a board and you may have mistakenly awarded a board seat to an analyst that's never been an operator. And by the way, board members, before you come down my street, I'm not upset about that. You have wisdom and insight, but you have to understand the lane that you swim in. Talking about going to market in an operational capacity that you've never had, and just looking at averages or percentages of what your portfolio does, every company in your portfolio is going to be a little different. And so you won't know how to contextualize it depends. So
Yeah.
no shame to my board. I love you. No shame, but I'm a big fan of the riches are in the niches. Know your role, know the lane that you swim in, know your zone of genius, and double down on that. And there's something about mastering your craft and really speaking to the things that you've mastered versus you're not going to ever hear me get on a podcast, even though I care about marketing and I do it for my company, coming on and talking about best practices for how to do LinkedIn or how to do demand gen or how to do SEO. I don't know. And nor do I want to know. I don't have time to do that. Respect, but you'll never see me talking about that because I stick with what I know and I've mastered and where I can be most helpful. And so I think that's the thing about if you're going to join a community, it doesn't matter if it's the biggest one out there. If you're going to get lost in a sea of things, maybe pick the one channel that's applicable to you then, if it's a Slack group or whatever it might be. So food for thought.
Well, it's an awesome conversation as always. I love hanging out with you anytime we can. I know your schedule's tight. So thanks for making time today.
Got you.
So obviously both you and I are the kind of people that folks can reach out to. So if you're a founder that's, trying to understand the organization and how you should grow it, Amy is a great person to talk to. If you're trying to figure out how to build a repeatable, scalable sales process, then I feel pretty strongly I could help you out. So Amy, if people wanted to get in touch with you about how to think through hiring, maybe take a moment or two, talk about ATP Studio and how people can get in touch.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure, unless somebody has created a bot with my name on it, but I'm pretty sure I'm the only Amy Volas on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, avenuetalentpartners.com. Those are the two easiest places. And ATP is focused on executive search for early stage founders that are between the $1 million to 25 million ARR mark. And we help you hire the right VP of sales or CS at the VP plus level to not do some of the things that we talked about today. And then we have the ATP Studio, and that's designed to help founders that really want to master the framework for themselves of how to hire well and right, and to learn how to fish instead of having us do it for you. So those are all the ways that I can be helpful. And Scott, thank you. I too feel the same way, and we could talk shop forever, and it's never enough time, and it goes by like that. So thank you for anybody listening. I hope this was helpful.
100%. Thanks for being on the show. And if you're listening and you want to grab some time with me to talk about sales process, what does it mean to be predictable, repeatable, scalable in your sales process? Best thing to do is just shoot me an email, Scott@salesqualia, salesqualia.com. Just type the word private into the subject line. It just lets me know you want to have a quick chat. You can also find me on LinkedIn and all that other good stuff. But if you want to have a chat, send me an email and we'll spend some time on Zoom. All right, Amy, I know we ran a little long. Been very generous with your time and more importantly, your expertise. So appreciate you. And we'll have to do another one of these episodes coming up in the next couple of months.
You're right back. I mean, look, if I'm now in the Hall of Fame, I got to keep my title. So yes, anytime, all the time. Thank you for having me. And this was lovely.
All right. We'll see you soon, Amy. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Bye.
That's a wrap. Amy's one of my favorite people to jam with, talk with, share experiences, share ideas, and most importantly, teach other founders just like you on some of the key principles, some of the key foundations that you have to build in order to get that scalable growth that you're looking for. So appreciate the partnership we've had with Amy over the years, both as a referral partner, we've both referred each other business, and of course, running our Chicago events that we ran this April. So if you want to learn more about Amy Volas and Avenue Talent Partners, as she mentioned, make sure you reach out to her on LinkedIn. Just find Amy Volas, Volas. She is very prolific on LinkedIn, writes tons of great content, very, very easy to find, and does respond to her direct messages there and her comments. You can also go to Avenue Talent Partners and check her out there. They do great work helping startups with executive search. As for me, as I mentioned earlier, just shoot me an email, scott@salesquality.com, type the word private into the subject line. We'll hop on a call. If for whatever reason I'm unavailable, I'll get you on a call very, very quickly with somebody on my team, and we can jam on some ideas and help you grow and build that repeatable, scalable sales process you're looking for. All right, that's it for now. Thanks so much for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. And until next time, go forth and sell. See ya.